Helen Mirren arrived at the ITV studios that morning with elegance, confidence, and the warmth she was known for throughout her long career. She had been invited to appear on Loose Women to discuss her upcoming theater project, a role she was genuinely passionate about, something she hoped would inspire audiences and celebrate her love for performing. The atmosphere backstage was calm. Crew members smiled, makeup artists chatted politely, and everything suggested a lighthearted, friendly interview. There was absolutely no sign of what was about to unfold. When she stepped onto the set, the audience welcomed her with applause. The other panelists, Kay Adams, Nadia Sawalha, and Janet Street Porter, greeted her enthusiastically. But seated in the center, hosting the discussion, was Denise Welch. Her expression was friendly enough at first, though her eyes carried a sharpness that hinted at something more pointed. Beneath the surface, the interview began smoothly. Denise asked Helen to describe the new play, and Helen lit up. She spoke with passion about the intimate, emotional nature of the work, how it felt refreshing to perform something meaningful and raw, something that reminded her why she fell in love with acting in the first place. The studio was quiet as she spoke. Everyone listened, captivated by her clarity and grace. But then, in a moment that felt as sudden as it was jarring, Denise's tone shifted. The warmth vanished. She leaned back in her chair and, with a smile that no longer looked kind, asked a question that froze the room. "Helen, don't you think you're a bit old to be playing romantic leads now?" The audience went silent. The air tightened. The other hosts exchanged shocked, almost panicked glances. Helen's smile remained, but her eyes darkened just slightly, not from confusion, but from disbelief. Denise continued, doubling down, her words laced with a casual cruelty she tried to disguise as honesty. She suggested that audiences might find Helen's romantic roles unbelievable, that such parts should go to younger actresses, and that seeing Helen embody passion on stage felt desperate. It was no longer a question. It was an attack. Helen took a breath. Not rushed, not emotional, controlled, steady. And then she spoke, not with anger, but with clarity, dignity, and razor-sharp precision. Her composure only made the moment more powerful. And this is where the conversation turned from uncomfortable to explosive. The studio air felt heavier now, as if every person in the room understood that something had shifted. Helen kept her posture straight, hands resting calmly in her lap. But there was a visible tension beneath her composed exterior. She repeated Denise's question softly, as though giving her one last chance to rethink it. "You're asking if I'm too old to play romantic roles." Her voice was polite, but it carried an unmistakable edge. Denise didn't step back. If anything, she leaned further into the confrontation. "Well, yes," she said, shrugging as if the remark were harmless. "You've had an incredible career, of course. But there comes a point where those kinds of roles should go to actresses who are still in their prime. Otherwise, it just feels forced." The audience let out a collective gasp. Kay shifted uncomfortably and tried to step in. "I don't think that's a fair way to frame it." But Denise raised her hand sharply, silencing her co-host. The dismissiveness was loud, unmistakable, and deeply disrespectful. Helen's smile faded. Her voice, when she spoke, was precise, the kind of precision only years of stage training and emotional control could create. "I have worked for over 50 years in this industry," she began slowly. "I have played queens, soldiers, judges, and yes, lovers. Age does not diminish the capacity to feel, to express, or to portray love." There was applause, small at first, then growing. But Denise wasn't finished. "I'm just being honest," she said loudly, as if volume could justify cruelty. "People don't want to watch older women act sexy. It's uncomfortable." This time, even the panel reacted. Nadia's eyes widened in disbelief. Janet leaned forward, her tone sharp. "Denise, that's not honesty. That's insulting." But again, Denise brushed them off. "Oh, please. Everyone is thinking it. I'm just the one brave enough to say it." Helen's composure wavered, not from weakness, but from the force of deep insult. She sat up straighter. Her eyes were steady, focused now directly on Denise. "Bravery," she said quietly, "is not found in tearing others down. It is found in respecting yourself and those around you. What you are doing is cruelty dressed as truth." The studio audience erupted in applause, some even cheering. Denise flushed red, feeling the shift in the room, and the loss of control. And that was when the argument stopped being tense and became personal. Denise's face tightened, her jaw clenching as the audience responded to Helen's words. What might have ended with a simple disagreement had now become a challenge. And Denise refused to be the one who backed down. She leaned forward, voice sharper, louder, and far less controlled. "You think you're above criticism because you have awards," she snapped. "But your time is over. At some point, the spotlight moves on. That's just reality." The room seemed to freeze. Kay blinked, stunned. Nadia covered her mouth with her hand. Janet's expression hardened completely. The audience murmured, the tension like static in the air. Helen didn't react immediately. She sat still, breathing once, calmly, the way someone does when they refuse to let another person dictate their emotional state. When she spoke, her tone was low, steady, and devastating in its precision. "My time," Helen repeated softly. "My time is defined by the work I create, not by the opinions of someone sitting on a daytime panel show." The audience gasped, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't. The power of the moment came from restraint. Denise's composure shattered. Her voice rose into something shrill. "Oh, of course. There it is. You think you're better than us. The great Dame Helen Mirren, too good for daytime television." Helen stood up slightly, adjusting her microphone pack. Her voice remained even. "I think I am better than cruelty disguised as journalism. That is what I will not entertain." Nadia reached out gently. "Helen, please." But Helen shook her head. The insult had crossed too many lines. It was no longer a discussion about roles or age. It was personal intention. It was disrespect. Denise stood too now, pointing accusingly. "You can't take criticism. That's your problem. You want everyone to worship you. But the second someone challenges you..." Helen interrupted, not loudly, but with a clarity that cut straight through the rant. "Criticism comes from a place of craft. What you are doing comes from insecurity." The audience reacted instantly. Applause, cheers, even a few whistles. Denise's expression twisted, wounded pride clashing with humiliation. "Security," Denise suddenly shouted, her voice trembling with outrage. "Get her out of here." The studio went dead silent. Even the security guards hesitated, unsure, uncomfortable, glancing at producers off camera. Helen removed her microphone calmly, her hands steady now. "You do not have to escort me," she told the guard softly. "I was leaving already." With grace that only made the contrast more brutal, she gathered her bag. The audience stood, many of them, and applauded. Not for drama, not for spectacle, but for dignity. Helen walked toward the studio exit, each step measured, her posture unshaken. The applause didn't fade, it grew. Camera operators lowered their equipment, unsure whether to keep filming or respect the moment. The atmosphere felt less like a television studio and more like a theater. After a powerful performance, behind her, Denise stood frozen, chest rising and falling in quick, uneven breaths. The realization of what had just happened, what she had caused, began setting in. This wasn't just a spicy debate. This was the moment that would shape headlines, social media storms, and public perception. And she knew it. Producer Claire rushed onto the stage, whispering to Kay and Janet urgently, while another producer approached Denise, attempting to coax her away from the cameras. But Denise shook him off, her voice cracking with emotion, not anger now, but confusion and bruised ego. "I didn't do anything wrong," she muttered. "I was just being honest." Helen paused at the studio door, not to turn back, but to gather herself. Even someone as composed as she had emotions swirling beneath the surface. The weight of disrespect, the sting of someone trying to reduce her work. Her legacy, it was heavy. But she would not let it show here. Not now. Not in front of them. Outside, assistants and crew stood awkwardly, unsure whether to speak. When she reached the exit, one young production runner stepped forward, voice soft, almost trembling. "I'm really sorry, Dame Helen. We didn't expect it to go like that." Helen gave a small, kind smile, the type that held no resentment, only empathy for someone caught in the crossfire. "It isn't your fault, dear." Inside the studio, the show went to emergency commercial break. The audience buzzed with shock and whispers. Kay leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "That was something," she murmured. Nadia's tone was far more direct. "That was cruelty, and it wasn't necessary." Denise sat down heavily, shoulders slumping. The adrenaline had drained. leaving something raw and exposed behind. The cameras came back on. Kay took a breath and addressed the viewers directly, voice calm but serious. We apologize for the disruption in the broadcast. Discussions can become passionate, but we aim for respect. We will be continuing the show shortly. But the moment had already escaped containment. Clips were being uploaded. Tweets were being drafted. Headlines were forming. And the world was choosing a side. Not between celebrity and host. Not between young and old. But between dignity and hostility. As Helen's car pulled away from the studio, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her silence had said more than words ever could.